Okay, so here's my thought process. First of all, my name is Julie. Hello. Thanks for joining me for this thought experiment. I'm watching the movie Superman, made in 1978. And I don't know if I've seen it before, probably years ago. I know I used to have the Superman Nintendo game back in the very early 90s, I guess, or late 80s. And I knew the concept was that Clark Kent turns into Superman and rescues Lois Lane. So the reason why I wanted to watch this movie actually was to literally, I felt some sort of download was going to come from it, but I didn't expect this. I was trying to understand the way kryptonite works, because I don't understand, and I actually still don't even understand. Like, a meteorite has some sort of... I thought kryptonite would be from the planet Krypton, and if Superman's from Krypton, why is kryptonite bad for him? No, kryptonite is actually a meteorite? Is that what's happening here? I'm just to the part of the movie where the bad guys have started to directly interact with Superman, so I don't know yet, but here's what actually came out of it for me now, so far. So when I sit with clients or do readings, some of what comes out is the Cinderella complex. This is something that I came upon in my own healing journey. I think at different stages, I was able to see it at different levels. And even when I knew it wasn't, like, right, I didn't know there were some subconscious programmings within me that still lived by it. Like, even though I didn't expect a man to rescue me, it was very late into my healing journey where I realized that no, I didn't want a man to rescue me, but I was still letting the idea of having a man be the rescue to me. And if that makes sense, it means like, it was like if I thought there would be one for me, and then I thought that he would be just as independent as me, so that we could be interdependent, which I perceive as the most healthy way to be in relationship. But sometimes I would have my eye on someone. Well, actually, it's been the same person for years now, and I've been rejected many times. So I would have to say, okay, if that one that I thought was the one is rejecting me, then there must be some other one. And then I would just keep that in my mind. So I was actually addicted to the idea that there was one. And then I came to the realization that, oh, even that is Cinderella complex. Because I'm not entitled to have it one. I'm not, like, sure, humans can meet up and get together and form families and have commitments and all of that. That's an option for humans who have free will to choose to do so. But I was operating under the assumption that as a part of my humanity and being on Earth, that was something that I was entitled to. And it actually has a lot more to do with free will and choice and possibilities and options and decisions than I was given credit for in my fairy tale mind. So when I say fairy tale, it's kind of the closest thing that I could use to really recognize that was, in fact, part of Cinderella complex. So even though I wasn't waiting for a man to rescue me, I was using the idea of a man to rescue me from feeling any lack of having a partner. Not because I'm not happy in life, but because I felt like it's more fulfilling to share my happiness in life. But my level of happiness actually doesn't change whether or not I'm sharing it, right? So the idea that I would need to have someone else to share it with is a little bit ridiculous now, from this healed standpoint. But it was the truth. It was everything I felt in the moments that I was living it. So I've shifted out of that perspective, but at the time I had the perspective, there were definite pains associated with it, and I only know that because I could not possibly let go of it, or there's no part of my mind that would like adopt the idea that it could not be that way, that I could be just as happy without that. So anyway, Cinderella complex is something that comes up in readings because it is this idea of a fairy tale relationship that a lot of women have been sold on through movies, through Disney, through just the idea of marriage itself. And I'm not saying that you can't have those things happen. I'm not saying that those things won't happen. But I am saying that there is a level of unhealthy attachment to those things happening, and sometimes we can attach to that idea from a very unhealthy angle. Okay, so the unhealthy angle would be when we use the idea, the premise, the perspective, to avoid dealing with some of the more inner things that need to be dealt with. For instance, whatever I had dealt with to finally release me from the illusion that I needed to have someone else to share my happiness with in order to feel really happy. It's not true. It's really true that having someone else to share it with will be like a little cherry on top, you know what I mean? So anyway, as I'm watching this movie Superman, well, before I move on to that part, let me just say that there have been many times where I got disillusioned, and then I have had to share my perspective, which also ends up disillusioning other women who may be stuck in that Cinderella complex. And luckily and happily, I have set up in my energy body that I only want to speak to people about it who are ready to hear it. So they have been open to at least considering it and doing with the information what they will from there. Oh, I have to pause because I left my toaster oven on. Hold on. Alright, so a disillusioned woman, and the idea of Cinderella complex, is then able to free herself from any of the limitations that she's placing on her own happiness. Great, wonderful. And her own ability to take responsibility for herself, which is way more important even. Okay, so as I'm watching Superman, I have this realization that there's likely men who are suffering from Superman complex. That's what I'm going to call it. I don't know if it's a real coined phrase already, but what I see that as is an aversion to women based on the idea that they would use their neediness or emotional weakness. I don't want to say emotions are weak. I just want to say that some people have been trained to put the responsibility of the caretaking for their emotions on others outside of themselves, mainly or namely men that they're in relationship with. But the idea that women who have used their emotions to manipulate and coerce men and to try to trap them into having to be caretaking for them on the premise that they're upset or sad or scared or in danger, you know, I could totally see how that would put an aversion in place for some men to be intimate with women, to be trusting of women, to be willing to have deeper conversations with women, to allow themselves to have emotions in a conversation, to allow themselves in a balance between logic and heart. So I wonder if this would be a more helpful angle to address the, I was going to say issue, but I don't want to label it as bad or wrong, but I'm going to say issue of some men not engaging with their emotional body in order to navigate a relationship with a woman. in order to spare themselves being manipulated. It may be subconscious, right? They're not aware that that's why they're fearful of engaging, but there's some level, some awareness in there, at least subconsciously, maybe even from an experience with mother, where woman's emotions were used to coerce or entangle or require a man to caretake or to tiptoe or to comply. And that's really, really, really fucked up. Now, not to judge the women either, because it seems like the women who are in Cinderella complex would be the women doing this, because they have an expectant perspective and an entitled perspective. They're expecting men to take care of them, and they're feeling entitled to that. Maybe because dads didn't do that. Maybe because there's a part of them still longing for it from childhood. Maybe because they didn't feel safe. Maybe it was modeled to them. Maybe it's just been passed along through several generations now. I'm not exactly sure, and it could vary for different people. But it makes sense then that if they encounter a man who's already wise to that pattern and how unhealthy it may be, that their response would be to withdraw or to withhold emotions, which then is perceived by women as an abuse. So interesting. But to look at it from this perspective, instead of pointing fingers at men and calling them narcissists, this seems a lot more healthy, because it's just more real and raw, and also understanding of two different perspectives that just happen to be clashing. So can these two come into balance? Yeah, certainly, but they have to do it for themselves, right? And otherwise, I would think they would still be attracted towards each other until one of them decided that they were going to balance out that energy. So the woman might decide she's going to caretake herself, her own emotions, make it her own responsibility, and to put herself into the happiness that she desires, and then choose to share that with the man who shows himself to be someone who also balanced out his fears so that he could share his emotions, with the knowing that he can be discerning enough to leave a relationship where a woman would be trying to manipulate him through her emotions. So I like the idea of talking about it in a way that allows both parties to take responsibility for their own stuff. And also, when I talk about men and women, I understand that we do have a whole segment of our population that doesn't identify. And I'm not trying to say that they're not included in this dynamic, but I don't have experience with that dynamic, so they will have to apply this experiment in thought as it applies to them. And if they were to take offense, I would just like to make clear that no offense was intended. No, what's that word where you exclude somebody? Segregation. No, nothing like that was intended through this. It's just that I can only speak from my own experience, right? So I've seen and understood that men who are withholding emotional investment in relationship are sometimes doing it because they have been manipulated emotionally, or been expected to caretake emotionally, or been entangled in something with a woman because of her expectant nature and her entitlement. So, wow, let's just take responsibility for our own stuff. Let's be sovereign, and let's bring each other the best versions of ourselves. Because if you look at my Fair Relating Reflection Oracle deck, you'll see that the whole purpose of it was to remove any of these type relating dynamics from the patterns that we're living out. And the deck is not needed once we have cleared up the patterns within ourselves. But while we're still in the evolution of learning and freeing ourselves, understanding ourselves, healing ourselves, feeling whatever it is that we hadn't felt yet that caused us to create a coping mechanism to avoid feeling it. The deck can be very helpful and useful because when we're in a pattern, when we're in an energetic pattern, we can't see everything clearly and we just see life through the filter of it. So the cards can help us remember the premise of what we are trying to achieve, which is a balanced way of relating, which is a way of relating that involves us taking responsibility for our own emotions, our own self, and our own behavior, and us not trying to depend on or expect of or be attached to an outcome or label or judge or have any power struggles in our relating dynamics or our relationships with anybody, and especially those that we care about and want to be in a close bonded situation with. And I use the word bonded very lightly because I don't believe in bondage, although I do believe in marriage. So I believe it's a choice that you decide you'll keep on making, and I think that it shouldn't be taken lightly. So I feel like I want to know that this is a choice that I want to keep on making, that this is somebody I want to grow and learn with and who wants the same with me, and that if there comes a time that we didn't anticipate coming, but that we don't grow together anymore, that we have grown apart, that we allow that for each other with no hard feelings, with full understanding, and with each taking responsibility for themselves and how that feels. But I do anticipate being able to match up with somebody who wants to grow and learn together. And it's probably someone who has had to recover from Superman complex and who has had that experience of women using those tactics, because that's someone who has demonstrated they are able to do the work if they can come back from that, and will understand the importance and the payoff of doing so. So, cool. Interesting. What do you think? What kind of things have you observed or experienced, or how can this concept help you? What do you have to add to the conversation? Any questions? Feel free to help me explore these topics further in the comment section, or directly through my email if you don't feel comfortable there. Okay. Thanks for spending your time with me.